Hello, thrill seekers. Welcome to Real Crime Stories, the channel that plunges you into the heart of spine-chilling mysteries, true crime cases, and unsolved enigmas that defy explanation. Today, we're unraveling a gripping collection of stories that will haunt your thoughts. If you're hooked on suspense and can't get enough of these eerie tales, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss a video. Now, brace yourself, let's dive into the first bone-chilling story. Murder on the Appalachian Trail. Holy shit. I'm still trying to process this. Forgive any typos. I'm shaking like a leaf right now. I found this site and thought maybe writing it down, vocalizing it somehow, might help make sense of what happened over the past 2 days. But maybe I should be calling the police? I honestly don't know. Okay, deep breaths. I'm an avid backpacker. Living close to the Appalachian Trail, where it snakes through the Blue Ridge Mountains, means I'm up there often, usually solo. I've been doing it for years, never once feeling the need for company. After this trip though, I don't know if I can ever backpack again. I reached my favorite spot just before sunset Monday night. Built a fire, pitched my tent, laid out my food. Routine. I was heading down to a spring to filter water when I swore I heard it, a high-pitched scream. Now, it's not totally unusual to hear coyotes, bobcats, animals that can mimic a human scream. So, I initially dismissed it. But something felt different this time, unnerving. As I filtered my water and started back, I saw him, a man coming from the east along the AT. Our paths would inevitably cross as I needed to traverse the trail to reach my camp. He slowed his pace, clearly having noticed me. Encountering other backpackers is usually no big deal. People on the trail are generally friendly, especially solo hikers looking for a bit of conversation. So, when we met, I offered a smile. Good evening. He introduced himself as Bradley. I told him my name. He looked like he'd been on the trail for a long stretch. Black military-style cargo pants, gray t-shirt, black combat boots, and a serious-looking backpack that seemed equipped for long-term survival. His reddish-brown hair was shaggy, unkempt, merging into a nearly full beard. Despite the rugged appearance, he greeted me with a wide, friendly grin. Bradley seemed like one of those guys you instantly click with, like old buddies. We chatted briefly. How long on the trail? The usual stuff. As I suspected, he'd been hiking for almost a month. Taking time off from life, he said, before heading back to reality. He seemed so genuine, so charismatic. Honestly, I felt like we'd known each other for ages. When he asked if he could camp near me, I saw no reason to refuse. Watching him unpack, I was struck by his efficiency. It was almost military in its precision, everything organized, movements economical, as if performed hundreds of times. After setting up, which took mere moments, he made coffee over my fire, and we talked about typical hiker things. As the night deepened, I noticed him growing quieter, staring into the flames or gazing up at the stars, sipping his coffee. Eventually, I decided to turn in. He said he'd do the same soon. Around 3 a.m., I heard his tent unzip. It was cold, and I distinctly remember the sound of his bootlaces being tightened. But then, silence. No footsteps crunching on leaves. I figured he needed to relieve himself after all that coffee. But all I could hear was the night breeze sweeping across the highlands. Thinking about it now makes me physically sick. Fuck. Okay. So, I'm lying there, drifting back towards sleep when I hear it again, far in the distance, but unmistakable this time. A man screaming. Pure, absolute horror. The sound echoed through the forest. One solid, desperate cry, then abruptly silenced. In that moment, half asleep, with the wind rustling the trees, I still wasn't entirely sure. An animal? But I sat bolt upright, fumbling for my flashlight. Silence again. Just the wind, the trees, and the feeling of every hair on my body standing on end. It took a long time, but I eventually drifted back to sleep, reasoning it away. The next morning, Bradley was already up, coffee brewing over a fresh fire. After rousing myself and starting my own breakfast, I asked if he'd heard anything during the night. He asked what I meant, and I described the scream. "Oh yeah, I did hear that, he said casually. Loud, wasn't it? We speculated about what animal could make such a sound, neither of us having a plausible answer. He even commented, to be honest, it sounded like a man screaming for his life. He asked if he could hike with me for a while. At that moment, frankly, I was glad for the company. Honest to God, he was such a nice guy. I never felt unsafe around him. Later that day, we passed another group. 3 women and 2 men, all with packs, heading the same direction but slower. They asked about a nearby water source. We both started to answer simultaneously, so I let Bradley finish. I've hiked this section countless times, practically grew up on it, but listening to him, you'd think he had too. His description of the trail ahead was flawless. I'd already noticed his impeccable memory and sense of direction. For the rest of the hike, he asked a lot about me. By the time we found a spot to camp for the night, I felt like I'd spilled my entire life story. He seemed so genuinely interested, though. At the time, I felt like I was making a real friend. That night, I noticed it for the first time. The large Bowie knife strapped to the side of his pack. He pulled it out and expertly sliced an apple, leaving almost nothing but the core and seeds. I briefly wondered where the apple came from, considering he'd mentioned the previous night being low on rations and planning to hit a store soon. But he tossed me a piece, and I didn't ask. He talked a bit about his family, specifically a younger brother he said I reminded him of. You would have got along with him, he mentioned more than once. He hasn't backpacked in years, though. John, his brother's name was. After John had gone away, Bradley said he didn't have a hiking partner anymore, hence going solo for the past 4 years. I started to feel sorry for him, sensing a loneliness beneath the easygoing exterior. Or maybe I just imagined it. Shit, at this point, I don't know what to think. Focus. That night, last night, I couldn't sleep. Wide awake, thinking about the trip ending, dreading the return to work and the real world. I needed to pee. Pulling on my shirt and boots, I tried to unzip my tent quietly, not wanting to wake Bradley. It was cold again. Standing among the trees, I could just barely hear, over the wind, the sound of voices talking. Must be that group we passed earlier, I thought. Hikers like that often forget others might be nearby, talking and laughing loudly. Curiosity, I guess, pulled me towards the sound. I don't know what I was thinking. I could see their firelight flickering between the pines. One of the women let out a loud laugh. As I got closer, maybe 25 feet away, shielded by trees, their voices suddenly dropped. Then the first scream hit me. It still saturates my mind. Shit, I need to stop typing for a second. Okay, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Those people were dying. I know that now. I saw the news when I got home. I couldn't see anything from where I was, so I don't know exactly how it happened. I mean, I know what happened because of the reports, but fuck, I don't really know. It felt like being trapped in a tornado of screams and darkness. Somehow, I was on the ground. Maybe I fell. Pine needles dug into my palms. All I wanted was to get back to my tent. I've never felt such fear. Yes, that's what it was, complete, paralyzing terror. I heard one of the men cry out a woman's name. I can't recall it now. His voice was pure horror. Then he started screaming, begging, crying, screaming. Finally, my legs worked. I ran, scrambled back towards my camp. By the time I dove into my tent, zipping it frantically, the air was utterly silent again. Something had killed those people, but I knew it wasn't a something, it was a someone. I knew it then, and I know it now. I felt disoriented, almost drunk, kept hearing phantom noises. I just sat there, frozen in my tent. That's what terror does. I don't know how much time passed, but my heart nearly stopped when I heard Bradley's tent unzip nearby. Then the distinct sound of him removing his boots outside his tent. A moment later, his zipper closed, followed by the rustle of him sliding into his sleeping bag. I didn't sleep a wink. Saturday there, rigid, until the sun came up. This morning, we made a fire, had breakfast. He chatted amiably about spring mornings, other trivial things. I don't know how I held myself together. I really don't. He asked if I wouldn't mind dropping him off at a store near the trail exit I was heading towards, where my car was parked. I agreed. Around 11 a.m. this morning, we pulled up to Breaker's Market, just off the AT. He thanked me, then asked for my number, in case he ever needed a partner for a hike. I gave it to him. After our conversations, he already knows roughly where I live, where I work. He shook my hand, patted me on the shoulder. I got in my car and drove straight home, arriving this afternoon. Collapsed, maybe slept for an hour. The local news just reported people missing on the trail, right where I was. Then an update. 5 people confirmed dead, in what appears to be an animal attack. What do I do? I know why those people are missing. They're dead, probably gutted, butchered, screaming for their lives until the end. God knows how many others might be out there. Their killer is still out there, and I gave him my phone number. He knows where I live. Story: The Killer's Journal, a new entry. My first true crime novel hit shelves in early 2011. It meticulously chronicled the 4-year reign of a serial killer in southern Illinois, detailing his grisly murders and culminating in his arrest. I believed it was absolutely perfect. Hundreds of hours poured into research, interviews, and writing had convinced me this was my surefire ticket to becoming a renowned author. My publisher, however, had other plans. They cited tight budgets and unceremoniously canceled my marketing campaign, a coincidence, they claimed, just as they funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars in resources toward another author. So, naturally, my novel tanked. No one bought it. And if there's one thing publishers avoid more than unpublished amateurs, it's authors with a single, spectacular failure under their belt. I've spent the subsequent years desperately trying to craft a new project, something to convince them I deserved another chance. When I heard about a string of fresh murders in my own town, it felt like fate, the perfect opportunity for a comeback. By the dim glow of my computer monitor, I poured another whiskey. The ice had vanished 3 glasses ago, but it hardly mattered. My research was paramount. The killer's background, his victims, his modus operandi, every gruesome detail. I took a sip, rereading a police report. He'd used a fire axe. Gory. Good. Gory sells far better than mundane firearm-related crimes. Better still, he targeted families, not individuals, another exploitable angle. I clicked on a news clip from the night of his arrest. The real kicker? The lunatic had turned himself in. I drained my glass, already outlining the narrative. Family serial killer with a conscience? I jotted down a list of contacts for the next day. The police raid on the killer's apartment had been heavily publicized. I knew exactly where he'd lived. I found the landlord of the complex and scribbled his number in the small notebook I always carry. A few well-placed lies, I figured, might grant me a tour of the killer's private quarters. The next morning, I woke to a splitting headache and a wave of nausea, but I wouldn't let it impede me. I dragged myself out of bed, showered, and headed out to meet the landlord. He was a tall, portly man in his late 40s, seemingly friendly, and, I suspected, more than a little gullible. He unlocked the apartment, guiding me through a few rooms. It had been almost entirely cleared out, likely first by the police, then by movers. I feigned interest as he continued the tour, showing me the kitchen, then the master bedroom. From my research, I knew this particular killer favored crawl spaces for hiding. Well, anything. My eyes scanned for possibilities and landed on a vent in the corner of the master bedroom, seemingly pressure fit into the wall. Seems like a great place, just what I'm looking for, I said, wiping a film of post-drinking sweat beading on my forehead. Mind if I use the bathroom before we head out? The landlord gestured to the master bathroom. Be my guest. I deliberately lingered, hoping he'd leave the bedroom. My patience was rewarded when he called out, I'll be by my car downstairs when you're finished. I slipped out of the bathroom and crept to the vent. A firm tug, and the metal grate slid smoothly from the wall. Inside was a cavity, perhaps 2 feet wide and a foot high, extending several feet back into the darkness. And there, lying in the dust on the metal floor, was a leather-bound notebook. My heart hammered. I snatched it, disbelieving my luck. It was thick, well used. I stuffed it under my shirt. Replacing the grate proved trickier than removing it, but I managed without much noise. Outside, I rejoined the landlord, turning for a final look at the small apartment. "I'm going to be honest with you," I said. "How's that?" he asked, confused. "I'm Jim Sullivan, a true crime novelist," I confessed. "I'm here to see if there's anything interesting left regarding your most recently departed tenant." His face clouded with anger. "So this was a complete waste of my time? I was wondering if you had any information about—" "Not for liars. Get off my property. I don't want to see you here again." I mumbled a thank you and retreated to my car, my mind consumed by the thick, leather-bound journal inside my shirt. I rushed home, guarding the notebook like a sacred relic. I set up my desk, a spiral notebook and a blue pen at the ready. Then, with trembling hands, I opened it. It was far better and far worse than I could have ever imagined. The killer had documented his murderous plans in excruciating detail. How he watched the houses, observed whether husbands loved their wives, if children were disobedient, what they ate for dinner, and when. He must have stalked them for days. But the planning was nothing compared to the graphic descriptions of the murders themselves. I had to pause midway through one account, where he obsessively described the look on a father's face as his wife died. I poured a tall drink, drained it, and poured another. The killer reveled in detailing their cries, their final, desperate moments, their pitiful pleas for mercy. I finished the bottle before I finished the notebook. After his account of the fourth family murder, the pages, mercifully, went blank. As he concluded his description of the last corpse's desecration, I closed the book, fingers trembling. My head throbbed from alcohol, and the horrific images seared into my brain, but a sick thrill, a perverse joy, began to bubble up. This was it, a treasure trove. 100 years of interviews couldn't have yielded what this single book had just dropped into my lap. I was going to be famous again. I laughed aloud to the empty room, raised the already empty whiskey bottle to my lips, licked the last drops, and stumbled to my bedroom. I woke late the next afternoon feeling woozy, a gnawing sickness deeper than any hangover I'd known. I must have drunk more than I'd planned, but who could blame me, after reading those horrors? No one. In fact, no one could blame me if I had another drink right now to ease the throbbing in my skull. I heaved myself to the kitchen, cracked open a beer, and walked back to my desk. As I passed, the notebook caught my eye. It looked different somehow, thicker. I picked it up. My blue pen was lodged inside. I opened it. A brand new entry, one that hadn't been there last night. I sank into my chair, trying to comprehend the script distinct from the killer's original hand, yet chillingly familiar. My blood ran cold as I deciphered the words. I read, in the same meticulous detail as the killer's, how I had supposedly gone to a mountain cabin and murdered a young couple on their honeymoon. How I'd killed the husband and taken the wife's body. I leaped up, scrambling to my computer, furiously Googling the address. Had I penned this in some alcohol-fueled homicidal fugue state? The address was real, a house just a half hour away. But there were no news reports of any murders in the area. My breathing hitched as I stared at the online pictures of the house. The descriptions from the notebook matched perfectly. The handwriting wasn't precisely mine, yet it was undeniably distinct from the killer's original script, and it had been written with my pen. I Googled the nearest payphone, noted its location, and drove there. With a gloved hand, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice asked. Can you send someone to a house for me? I'm concerned something bad may have happened. Sir? What do you... I cut her off, rattling off the address. Did you get that? I repeated the address and hung up. Driving back, my mind raced. God, I needed a drink. The garage door rumbled open, and I pulled inside. Only then did I see the axe on the floor. I closed the garage door and circled my car. An Axioni I didn't recognize lay on the concrete beside the door to my house. I knelt, picking it up. Its metal head was crusted with dried blood and matted hair. I stumbled back, hand clapped over my mouth. When no monster leaped from the darkness, I dropped the axe and lurched inside to open another bottle. The next hour was a blur of constantly refreshing news sites, praying for the first time in years. Please, let this be some huge misunderstanding. Please. It took less than 3 hours for the double homicide to hit the front pages. By then, I was already deep in an alcoholic haze. Every detail was correct. Husband dead, wife missing. Then it hit me. I hadn't thoroughly searched my own house. The wife's body was somewhere. Wouldn't she be in the house of her killer? The notebook had been silent on her final location. I scoured my house for another hour, but found nothing. A bizarre revulsion for the notebook washed over me. It had caused this. I wasn't sure how, but I knew. If I'd never picked it up, there'd be no axe in my garage, no conscience so heavily burdened by... No, that wasn't possible. I had to get rid of it. Burning it crossed my mind, but I dismissed the idea. An instinct, a compulsion, told me the notebook belonged back in the apartment where I found it. I downed a shot of espresso to clear my head, then started walking. The apartment was only a few blocks away. I figured I'd already killed enough people for one day. The night air was cold, but I barely felt it through the fog of guilt, confusion, and terror. 20 minutes later, I reached the killer's apartment. A ground floor window was unlocked. I slid it open and climbed inside. Closing it behind me, I surveyed the dim space. The other killer had turned himself in, hadn't he? He'd had a conscience. My mouth twisted into a snarl. It wasn't my fault, even if I did it. It was this damned notebook. I pulled it out and threw it to the floor. After a moment's hesitation, I scooped it back up and ascended the dark stairs to the master bedroom. It was as I'd left it, though the vent looked disturbed. Maybe the landlord had noticed my tampering. No matter. I knelt, yanked hard on the vent, slicing my thumb as the metal slid free. I reached for the notebook, then extended my arm into the dark recess, where my hand brushed against something soft and disturbingly wet. I fumbled for my phone's light. The beam illuminated the body of a woman, her form slick with enough blood to hang the metallic scent of iron heavy in the air. I recoiled, mind reeling. Surely I hadn't killed this woman then driven her here? My earlier thought resurfaced. The woman's body was almost certainly on the killer's property. The front door of the apartment below crashed open. I spun, scrambling backward on hands and knees, as slow, steady footsteps ascended the stairs. The bedroom door creaked open, the light flicked on. The landlord I'd met stood in the doorway, holding an axe covered in fresh, wet blood. "Well, I'm sad to say you weren't at home this time," he said, his beefy fist gripping the axe head. "You're probably wondering what the hell's going on, am I right?" He jabbed the handle towards me. "Am I right?" I nodded slowly, mind racing for an escape. He hefted the axe. "There's just something about convincing other people that they're killers. Not even the light leaving someone's eyes gives me the rush I felt when that poor sap turned himself in. Sorry, liar. You just happened to be the next to pick up the book. But you made it easy. You even gave me your name. Looks like I'll have to leave that notebook out for someone else to find. Maybe a detective will wake up to find he's killed his wife. What do you think?" He took a menacing step into the room. I lunged for the bathroom. I knew from my earlier reconnaissance it had a window. I'd taken only a few steps before the axe slammed into the back of my left arm. Ignoring the searing pain, I threw myself at the window, arms crossed in an X, and crashed through the glass. The fall was just long enough for me to reflect on my disastrous decisions before I hit the ground. A dozen bones, it felt like, shattered on impact, but that wasn't my immediate worry. My worry was hearing those heavy footsteps again. Instead, I heard a cry of surprise. A young couple ran towards me. "Are you okay?" the man shouted. The last thing I registered before blacking out was the woman's voice calling the police. "I'll spare you the details of my hospital stay, the police's ongoing fruitless search for the landlord, and my recurring panic attacks. They still haven't found him, and I doubt I'll sleep soundly until they do." I allowed the police to make copies of the notebook, but I still own the original. Story: He wanted to be remembered. Many have forgotten, or perhaps never knew, what transpired at West Covina High School back in 2012. A tragic oversight considering the victim, Jeff Farisco, often spoke of his desire for an enduring legacy. Jeff Farisco was the golden boy of West Covina High, a star athlete in both baseball and football, a status that naturally conferred immense popularity. He possessed a striking presence, tall, with dark skin, wavy black hair, captivating amber eyes, a dazzling smile, and a physique that seemed sculpted. Every girl, myself included for a time, was drawn to him. Yet, he only ever saw me as a friend, despite my position as head cheerleader and my own lack of difficulty securing dates. Surprisingly, vanity was absent from his character, a trait that only amplified his appeal. He treated everyone with kindness, even those on the fringes of our social ecosystem, the nerds, the loners. His family was affluent, known for their generous donations to charities and cancer centers. His father a university professor, his mother a corporate executive. Jeff was, quite literally, the epitome of the boy next door, albeit an exceptionally charismatic one. One peculiarity many noted, however, was his preoccupation, almost an obsession, with being remembered and missed after his death. He'd voiced this desire frequently, to almost anyone he encountered, multiple times a day. Most dismissed it as an odd quirk. Imagine then the collective shock and horror when news spread. Jeff had been found. The back of his head caved in, his stomach slashed open, his own intestines fashioned into a grotesque noose by which he hung from the football field's goalpost. The school, the town, reeled in shock and hysteria. Foul play was immediately suspected. Police interviewed everyone who knew him, from his distraught parents down to the school custodian, who briefly became the prime suspect. But the investigation yielded nothing. The killer, they concluded, had worn gloves. No fingerprints were found. The only tangible piece of evidence was a bloody ladder discovered in the school garden shed, where the custodian kept his tools, the reason for his brief status as a suspect. His parents endured a torrent of accusations and whispers from the community. Eventually, unable to bear the relentless suspicion, they moved away. Cruel rumors circulated that his wealthy, perfect parents had murdered their only son for the thrill of it, confident they could escape justice and frame a school employee. These theories were, of course, ludicrous. The Veriscos adored Jeff. I adored Jeff. And that is why I resolved to ensure he would be remembered, just as he wished. I had to demonstrate the depth of my love, even if he couldn't reciprocate it in kind. That's why, on a cold morning at 1 a.m., I called him, rousing him from sleep. The gloves, a Christmas gift from my father, were already on my hands. I feigned a broken-down car at an empty park, knowing he'd never refuse a plea for help. He thrived on being needed. That's why, as he examined my engine, I struck him from behind with a crowbar. That's why I summoned all my strength to hoist his unconscious form into my trunk. That's why I drove as fast as I dared, running stop signs and red lights, thankfully unobserved by police, to reach our school football field, his former kingdom, before he regained consciousness. I had to drag his dead weight from the parking lot to the goalpost, taking numerous breaks to catch my breath. That's why, as I withdrew my knife, I promised him he would be remembered. I swiftly gutted him. It would have been easier if the act hadn't roused him. For a sickening moment, I feared his scream would alert someone, or worse, summon the police. That would have ruined my ultimate expression of love for Jeff. Thankfully, his scream quickly faded to a gurgle, then silence, his efforts to breathe increasingly shallow from the massive blood loss. He stared up at me, his eyes filled with a profound hurt and betrayal that, I admit, confused me. I felt an obligation to explain. You will always be remembered, Jeff, just like you always wanted. A flicker, a spark, ignited in his eyes for a fleeting moment upon hearing those words. He managed to part his lips. Thanks, he managed, a faint whisper, before succumbing to his injuries. Tears welled, a strange mixture of sorrow and elation. Sadness that the love of my life was gone, yet elation that I was the one to fulfill his deepest wish. But the task wasn't complete. I had to ensure Jeff Verisco would never be forgotten. I hurried to the custodian's shed by the school garden, picked the lock, and retrieved a ladder. I rushed back to Jeff's body, the ladder clutched under my arm. Back at Jeff's lifeless body, I positioned the ladder against the goalpost. Hauling his form up was an immense challenge. It took 4 grueling attempts. Finally, with his body at the top, I pulled his intestines from the gaping wound in his stomach. I looped a section around his neck, then secured the rest to the crossbar, struggling to prevent his limp form from toppling. Then, I climbed down and kicked the ladder away, leaving him to dangle. My work was complete. No one would ever forget him now. But people have forgotten. They moved on with their lives. Years have passed without a whisper of the mysterious murder. I failed Jeff. He would be so disappointed in me. I need to rectify this. I need people to remember the amazing Jeff Verisco. That is why I am posting my confession here. Please, remember him. Tell people about Jeff Verisco, the charismatic high school student whose promising future was so brutally extinguished, who met such a grisly end. He never wanted to be forgotten. Story: my parents' search history. My first brush with the dark web, courtesy of my friend Alex, was a revelation. It was astounding that such a hidden corner of the internet could host a veritable bazaar of illicit activities. Until today, my explorations had been limited to coding tutorials and dabbling in petty digital misdemeanors. But after the horrifying videos I just unearthed, I doubt I'll ever venture there again. I met Alex shortly after starting high school. My parents had uprooted us to a new town, leaving me friendless. The initial loneliness was palpable, but I adapted. Their reason for the move, a string of unsolved murders in our old town, struck me as an overreaction, a paranoid flight across the country, but I let it go. Alex and I bonded quickly over a shared fascination with the internet and its boundless offerings. I was a devoted gamer, a proud Tier 3 Pokimane subscriber. He was the coder, the developer, drawn to the web's architecture. 2 years solidified our friendship. We were older now, sharper. And Alex had discovered the dark web, an obsession that consumed him. He spent nearly every waking hour plumbing its depths, sifting through unimaginable content. It seemed harmless enough, a digital curiosity, until one particular search became the gravest mistake of his life. I remember waking one morning to a barrage of texts from him, dozens. This was uncharacteristic. Alex was a man of few words, an introvert by nature. I unlocked my phone, a sense of unease settling in. "Dude, Jack, you have to come over. Right now. This is important. Jack, please wake up. This is urgent. Where are you?" The messages continued in this frantic vein, each imploring me to come to his house immediately. My parents were still at work, so I hurried over. 4 police cruisers were parked haphazardly in front of Alex's house. A throng of onlookers and news vans crowded the lawn. I pushed through, and Alex's mother, tears streaming down her face, instructed an officer to let me in. "What's going on, Mrs. Gonzalez?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Alex, he's missing," she choked out, dissolving into fresh sobs. My heart plummeted. How? He'd just texted me. Then it hit me. What if he was trying to warn me? What if his messages were connected to his disappearance? Still reeling, I approached a detective in the kitchen. "Is Alex going to be okay?" "Of course he is. He'll be just fine. We're going to find him very soon," the detective responded, a practiced reassurance in his voice. Something about his tone felt hollow. A chilling premonition settled in my gut. I wouldn't see Alex again. Remembering the texts, I pulled out my phone. "He texted me this morning. What if this has something to do with him going missing?" I said, my voice tight. As the detective read the messages, his expression darkened. He informed me they'd need to keep my phone for the investigation, promising its return later. I lingered at the house for a while, partly out of a sense of loss for Alex, partly to offer what little comfort I could to his distraught parents. They'd always been kind to me. Seeing them like this was painful. His mother's weeping was relentless. Eventually, I slipped into Alex's room, a desperate hope that I might find some clue, some explanation. I searched meticulously, but found nothing. Then I noticed it. Alex's computer was on, the monitor dark. I fumbled for the power button. As the screen flickered to life, my stomach clenched. The dark web. That, in itself, wasn't unusual for Alex. But the dozens of open tabs were. This was not normal. I closed and locked the door, then began to navigate his digital trail. Initially, it was standard Alex fare. Then, the content shifted. One tab displayed an article about a murder from several years ago. A woman found dead in her apartment, her body mutilated, doused in acid. Nausea roiled as I skimmed the text and glimpsed the horrific crime scene photos. Shaken, I switched tabs, only to find another article detailing a different murder. Confused, I clicked through the remaining open pages. All of them were similar. Gruesome crimes, unsolved murders. One, however, stood out. It detailed a murder from 2 years prior. As I read, a cold dread seeped into me. It was the murder of our former neighbor, the very incident that had prompted our sudden move. How did Alex know about this? I'd never mentioned it. It hadn't seemed important. A strange coincidence, I tried to tell myself. Then I saw his final search query, my last name. Horror and confusion warred within me. I stumbled out of his room. "Is everything all right, dear?" Alex's mother asked, dabbing at her eyes. "Yeah, I need to go home for dinner," I stammered. The walk home was a torment of unanswered questions. Why was he searching my family name? Did he suspect me? That had to be why he'd been texting so frantically. If only I could explain, tell him I was innocent. But I couldn't. He was gone, and I had to find out why. Once home, I raced to my room, slammed the door, and booted up my computer. Tor browser, VPN, engaged. I knew what I had to do. My fingers trembled as I typed my last name into the dark web search bar, each letter amplifying my apprehension. Enter. Nothing. A blank screen. Confused, I refreshed. Still nothing. Why would Alex search this if there was nothing? There had to be something. I was about to close the tab, convinced it was a dead end, when the page began to load, agonizingly slow. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the screen populated, revealing hundreds of video thumbnails. I knew, with a sickening certainty, what they were. Murders. But why were they linked to my last name? A part of me screamed to turn back, to flee the horrors I knew awaited. But I couldn't. This had to be why Alex was missing. I clicked on the first video. It opened on a woman, strapped to a chair, in what looked like a basement. Instant, horrifying recognition. Our neighbor, from 2 years ago. The distinctive heart-shaped tattoo on her neck was unmistakable. She struggled, panic etched on her face, her screams for help muffled. Then, 2 figures entered the frame. At first, their faces were obscured. As they turned towards the camera, my world tilted. My parents. My father clutched a knife. My mother held a small scalpel. They paused, then began. The next 5 minutes were the most horrifying of my existence. I watched them dismember her, listened to her beg for mercy, her screams echoing in the suffocating space until her last breath filled the room with the coppery scent of blood. The video ended, seamlessly transitioning to another. The same room, the same chair. I was traumatized, physically ill. I couldn't watch anymore. My parents were murderers. The real reason for our move, the secret they'd so carefully guarded, was now hideously clear. All this time, I'd thought Alex was accusing me. I was so wrong. He was trying to warn me. I scrolled through more videos, each set in that same dreadful room. I was about to close everything, to run to the police, when I noticed it. A new video, uploaded today. My hand, slick with sweat, clicked play. A man this time, strapped to the chair, a sack over his head. Again, my parents entered. My father approached the figure, yanking the sack free. At first, I didn't recognize him. Then, the world fractured. It was Alex. Story: My Unsolved Cases. Imaginary Friend. Hey, so I'm glad you all liked reading about my last case. It really helps me pass the time nowadays. Well, like I said, I'll stay in chronological order. So this next case came up about 1.5 years after the last one. At this point, I've been on the force for about 5 years. So this case is unique for 2 reasons. This is the only case I will write a but that has legally been solved, but I'm not so sure. And this was my first case that I could actually respond to in real time, because it was called into my local department. Anyways, I guess I'll just hop right into it. So I'm just drinking coffee, passing the time. It was around 9:30 p.m. by this point when we get this call. Our department actually plays any local emergency calls they get over an intercom in the detectives department. They do this so that we can form an opinion in real time. It helps us out a lot when we arrive on the scene. Any detectives will know what I'm talking about. Anyways, I was the only detective on duty. There were 3 of us currently employed with the department, and this call came in over the speaker. It started off as most do, some panicked person barely able to get out a coherent sentence. Then the operator asks the person to calm down so that she can better understand. It took this man about 2 minutes, longer than usual, to calm down enough to be able to speak audibly. Like I did on the last story, I'll just give you the transcript, but I'll skip to the part where you can actually understand what he's saying. Operator: Okay, sir, so again, tell me your emergency. Victim, name blurred out. Okay, I can do this. He breathes out heavily. Okay, so I was just making sure all of the doors in my house were locked before I went to bed. But when I got to my back door, I saw a shadowed silhouette of a man. I was in disbelief. I thought it was just a tree's shadow that I was looking at funny, but I went upstairs to take a look, just to be sure. When I got upstairs, takes another deep breath. His voice was trembling this whole time. When I got upstairs, I looked down and had a better visual of what I was looking at. It was definitely a man, and he was staring straight at me. All I could see were his eyes, and he was looking straight at mine. Operator: Is he still there, sir? Victim: I don't know. I ran into the closet out of fear. Should I go check? Operator: No, sir. Stay where you are. I am sending a squad car now. Victim: Okay. I'm just going to take a quick peek outside. Operator: Sir, please stay where you are. Help is on their way. This is where I ran to one of the 2 squad cars that we departing the station to answer the call. Luckily, I didn't miss any dialogue because the man just agreed and stayed put in his closet. A couple more minutes passed, we were nearing the scene, and the victim started talking again. Victim: I just heard something. I think he's on my porch. I'm going to check. Operator: Sir, please stay where you, Victim: He's still here. Leave. He screamed this in desperation from his window. The man was really beginning to lose his mind during all of this. Operator: Sir, get back in the closet. Victim: Okay, I'm back. He was still in the same spot. He hasn't even moved. Why hasn't he moved? This is when we arrived. The only reason I was allowed to answer this call is because the department recently allowed it after we pressed our chief because of the value of real-time evidence. We walked upstairs and found the man trembling in his closet, clutching his cell phone for dear life. He began screaming, "Did you find him? Did you find him?" We had 1 cop searching the perimeter, and he radioed in saying he found nothing. We asked this man to show us where he had seen the intruder. He hesitantly took us out to the backyard where we proceeded to find nothing. This was typical of an intruder call. We could never find the criminal on the initial call, but this was different. It was different because the man who made the call started screaming bloody murder. He began yelling, "Do you not see him? He's looking right at me. Arrest him, please." We looked at him baffled and asked him what he was talking about. He responded louder than before, "Do you not see him? He's looking right at me. You're right next to him." This proceeded for another 5 minutes, and it eventually led to us taking him into the station to be evaluated. This was the first time I was able to witness a psychiatric evaluation. The interview was eerie. You could tell this man had been shaken to his core. The unusual thing about this guy was that, unlike every other mentally insane person brought in for questioning, this guy had no past to make us suspect he was insane. Like I said, this was my first time witnessing this with the force, so I didn't know the difference. Anyways, I'll just paraphrase how their conversation went. Psychiatrist: So tell me, name blurred, what exactly did you see? Victim: Well, sir, he takes a deep breath. I saw a man. He was just looking at me. His eyes were much bigger than a normal human's. Psychiatrist: Normal humans? Victim: Yes, unless he was wearing a mask or something. I don't think this man was human. He didn't have a nose or mouth, just eyes, and they would come off of me. Psychiatrist. Okay, son, what else can you tell me? Victim. Well, when the police came to help, they walked all around this man, and the man didn't even acknowledge that they were there. He just kept eye contact with me. The interview continues like this for a little while longer, and after it was over, the psychiatrist came into the room where the two other detectives and I were sitting. The other detectives had been called in by this point. So, he tells us that, even after hearing what the victim said, he doesn't believe he is lying. He told us that this man genuinely believed what he told us was true, and judging by what he told us, the psychiatrist determined the man must have been psychotic. We talked to the man the next morning and told him that he was going to be sent to a psych ward for the next 2 months for rehabilitation. We sent him off, and I didn't hear, nor did I even think about the case for the next 2 months. I just wrote him off as crazy. 2 months pass, and we are told in our morning briefing that the man was released and was supposedly no longer mentally unstable. It didn't take the man more than 12 hours to call us. Literally that night, he called in complaining about the same thing. I wasn't working during this time, but the detective who was filled me in, and from what I heard, it was basically the same thing that happened with me. The detective told me that they warned the man that if he made one more false call, then they were going to have to arrest him. I guess this scared the man off for a day, but just 3 nights after being released, he called again. Luckily, I was working during this call. While I was in the car heading towards the man's house, I was listening in on his call with our operator. I have since lost this call's transcript, but I do remember one thing about this call. In fact, I'll never forget it. This man had been calling from the same closet that he did when we first responded, and he had that same panicked voice, describing that same ominous figure. Only this time, instead of claiming the man was outside, he began yelling bloody murder. Just like in the dancing man case, when the victim yelled so loud that the phone call became muffled, the same thing happened here. The man was all calm in his closet, just waiting for the police to arrive, when he says something like, "Wait, what was that?" The operator pressed him to stay in the closet, and he just ignored it. I heard him open his closet door and take what might have been 2 steps before silence fell over the call. The silence was broken when the operator started questioning the man and asking him what he was looking at. The man just responded ever so softly, He's right in front of me." Silence once again came over the call, and was once again broken by the operator. She was begging the man to respond to her. He never did, and we arrived on the scene 3 minutes later. We walked upstairs to his closet. As we were walking, I noticed that every access point, including the back door, was closed and locked. We got up to the scene and saw just the victim, dead, after drowning in his own blood. His throat was cut, and after 3 days of investigating the crime scene, the department declared it a suicide. I pleaded with them not to close the case so quickly, but it was no use. It looks bad when a department reports an unsolved homicide. I doubt that this was a suicide for 2 reasons. 1, and probably the more obvious reason, a suicide weapon was never found. And 2, I got a good look at the victim and his dead body. His throat was cut open all right, but not by a knife. The cut was rough. It looked almost forced. Almost like someone cut his neck with their fingernail. Other detectives did too. The vibe in the office was just eerie for the next couple of days. The creepiest part was when we asked the psych ward that we sent him to for their evaluation reports on him. We read them, and every time the doctor would give him the same evaluation, he would talk about how the man acted immature and was just acting under the stress of daily life. But at the end of every report, all 10 of them, he would put the same sentence. Seems completely stable, just can't get over his imaginary friend. Story. I am working a decade, old, unsolved case file at work, and I need your help. Part 1. The case. Following the family line, I'm the lead detective here in Jellensburg. My father held the post before me, his father before him. It's a rural town, and being the detective isn't nearly as glamorous as it sounds. Mostly paperwork, honestly. My office reflects it. Dark, cramped, old wood paneling, permeated by the scent of musk, old leather, and maybe a hint of mold. Crime is practically non-existent. Everyone knows everyone. Doors stay unlocked, kids roam freely. News travels fast, rarely taking more than a day or two to make the rounds. We're a close-knit community. My days are fairly standard, so I won't bore you with minutia. Wake up, coffee, morning constitutional, head to work, more coffee, paperwork, maybe joke with the deputies about some harebrained excuse for a parking ticket. Today, however, I woke feeling strangely productive and decided it was as good a day as any to tackle the mountain of old files, clear some space. Nobody in the department enjoys cleaning, so those food-stained, yellowing documents have festered for years. I'm no better. I see them daily and avoid them like the plague. Hell, I figured if I worked slowly enough, I could stretch the task across my entire shift. As tedious as it was, time passed quicker than usual while filing old, closed cases. Stacks upon stacks of parking tickets, petty theft reports, minor vandalism, court documents, nothing remotely investigative, nothing worth a second glance. Until I found a particular manila folder. It wasn't marked green, our designation for closed and completed files. That was odd. In a town this small, an unsolved case is highly unusual. Even stranger, I'd never heard of this specific case. I've worked here for years, lived here my entire life, and not once did I recall anyone mentioning it. The first page was a clipped newspaper headline: Serial Murders Plague Town, Police Struggling for Solid Leads. Reading on, I learned 3 men had been found murdered in their own homes. No fingerprints, no footprints, not a single drop of foreign bodily fluid, only the victim's blood. No hair fibers, no skin under fingernails. Whoever committed these murders vanished without a trace. And I say one person because the cases shared a chilling common factor: the method of killing. It's characteristic of serial killers to have a specific MO, their signature, if you will. In this instance, the similarities were stark. All 3 victims were male, varying ages, heights, wealth. All murdered in their homes. All had their mouths stretched so wide, their jaws were snapped. All had their eyes messily scooped from the sockets and shoved deep down their own throats. All had their arms, legs, and torsos littered with strange markings, sliced with surgical precision. No notes on the language or meaning. The next few pages were printouts of crime scene photos. They were horrifying. Now, I've seen blood, plenty of it. But the sheer volume plastered over walls, sheets, and floors in these pictures was staggering, gruesome even on paper. My stomach churned. I flipped past the photos quickly, deciding to revisit the file details later, when I had more time and a stronger stomach. Looking any longer risked losing my morning coffee. Fucking sick. I spent the rest of the day finishing the filing, signed off on a few documents, and clocked out 10 minutes early. On my way out, I stopped by the front desk. Amanda works there, young, new, but sweet and genuinely passionate about becoming an officer someday. Amanda, you ever hear about unsolved murders from years back? Maybe 10 years ago? She squinted, brow furrowed. Not really. Maybe no one talks about it because it's still an open case? Dunno. Seems like more reason to talk about it. How do you solve a case by pretending it doesn't exist? Couldn't tell ya, she shrugged. Probably gone cold. 10 years is a long time. Trails dry up, leads go nowhere. But 3 men were violently murdered. I murmured, more to myself than to her. We owe it to the families to keep trying. The file felt heavy in my hand as I imagined the families still living without closure, without knowing who took their loved ones, thinking the police gave up. That's not what we stand for. Amanda gave an understanding nod. Look into it then, but don't get discouraged. Killer's probably long gone, and we both know it. She wasn't wrong. The odds were slim. But putting my skills towards something like this, even if it failed, it felt more meaningful than letting it gather dust. It might mean something to those families. I didn't even bother with dinner when I got home. Just collapsed on the couch with my cat, my laptop, and that case file. After the photos came police notes, all handwritten. Initial suspects, the wives. They were the only other adults home, besides children, in one case. when the crimes occurred. Spouse is always suspect number one. No recorded interviews or typed transcripts, just handwritten statements from each wife. Statement: Mrs. Hagen. I have no idea what happened. We ate dinner, watched television like always. Trevor felt exhausted from work, decided to head to bed early. Around 8, I think. It was quiet the rest of the night. Until I went upstairs to grab something from the master bathroom. That's when I saw. I'm sorry, I couldn't. It was just completely gruesome. Couldn't conjure up a scene like that in my worst nightmare. Blood everywhere. Sheets, walls, carpet, everywhere. The whole room smelled like death and copper. It took days before I could speak. Too traumatized. I never even heard him scream. Statement: Mrs. Tremble. Well, it was the weekend, so Derek and I were off work, Michael off school. Spent the day grocery shopping, then cleaning the attic. We'd been planning on moving. Derek just hadn't seemed the same since he stopped talking to his close friends. I asked what was wrong, but he always brushed it off. Anyway, we were boxing things up. Derek went to grab some blankets from the room, told Michael to stay help me lift things. Of course, Mikey was young, couldn't lift much, but Derek made him feel like the man of the house. Such a good father. After about 30 minutes, I wondered what was taking so long. I went to check on him, Mikey in tow. So, yes, our son saw his father's mutilated body. His scream still echoes in my head every day. I don't even want to think about what I saw. It didn't even look like my husband anymore. Statement: Mrs. Mason. As much as I'd like to forget that night, it's still so vivid, like it just happened. Guess something like that haunts you. I lost my husband while he was just one room over. Our marriage had been rocky for the past year. He withdrew, was constantly gone. Remember a few years back, he'd come home with this smile and fingernail marks on his back. So sure he was having an affair. I was desperate to make it work. Nothing helped. He just locked himself in the guest room. I'd hardly see him. That room is right next to mine. Well, ours. Maybe a foot of wall separating us. How could I not have heard it? No thumping, no screaming, nothing. Dead silent apart from my television. Window wasn't open. No intruder. It's like something tore him apart from the inside, or in a split second. Still don't understand. Don't think I ever will. Several things about these statements are deeply unsettling. The most prominent: none of the wives heard screams or any struggle, despite being within definite earshot. Either the killer muffled the victims incredibly effectively, unlikely, or the wives are lying. Additionally, Mrs. Tremble checked on her husband only 30 minutes after he went to the room alone. That means the killer had to break in silently, overpower the man, kill him, and meticulously carve over 50 markings, all within 30 minutes. It doesn't add up. And those markings, the precision was uncanny. Carved with no jagged edges, perfectly clean, equally deep. I could only hope the victims weren't conscious. The more I read, the more confused I become. But I have a plan. Tomorrow, interview the widows and the son who witnessed the aftermath. Revisit their memories. Then, hit the evidence room, dig up anything missed. I know one home had a crappy surveillance camera. Even poor quality might help. Revisit the crime scenes, document everything fresh. No solid motive or suspects yet, but hopefully that changes soon. If you want updates, I'll provide them. If you have ideas on where else to look, I'm all ears. Let's find the monster who did this. Part 2. The interviews. No time wasted. Let's get straight to it. All 3 widows agreed to interviews on short notice, calling off work. They seemed shocked the case was being reopened. Reading your comments, the consensus leans towards affairs, so that became my focus. You've raised excellent points. Multiple perspectives help. This isn't average. Disclosure. Participants agreed to note-taking, but not release of photos, videos, or recordings. Transcripts are accurate. Here's the key part of the interview with Mrs. Mason. S.S. Self. M. Mason. S. Thank you for coming in, ma'am. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. You're welcome. When I heard you were reopening the case, I was ecstatic. It's been too long with no answers. A hard few years. S. I need to ask a few questions about the night of your husband's death. If you feel uncomfortable, please let me know. Be honest, any detail helps, okay? M. I'll do my best, detective. S. In your statement, you mentioned a rough patch in your marriage. Can you elaborate? M. Yeah. Howard and I were married about 6 years when things started, questioning his loyalty. We were fine, sex life fine, rarely fought. Then he started coming home with this mischievous look, scratch marks, couldn't understand why he'd see another woman. Went on for weeks every night, defensive when I asked where he'd been. Said he was with buddies, having drinks, never smelled of alcohol. S. So, you were confident he was having an affair? M. I could just tell, and, never mind. S. No, please, anything could be a lead. M. When, on the few occasions after the supposed affair that we were intimate, Howard looked at me with disgust, like my body wasn't good enough, hurt my feelings. He'd never been like that, always made me feel beautiful. S. Strange. Disapproval withdrew as time went on. M. Yes. S. The night he passed, he was in the guest room? M. Yeah. Always stayed there then. S. Right next to the master bedroom, where you were? May. Right. Thin wall separates them. Know that because my sister stayed over once, heard her snoring through it. S. But you heard nothing while your husband was murdered? Nothing at all? M. Not one thing. Not shuffling. He was always quiet, usually music or videos on his computer, headphones in. Just as quiet as usual. S. Something isn't adding up. Seems impossible to kill someone silently. Even muffled, you'd hear a struggle. M. Exactly. These last few years, I've told myself he was killed instantly when whoever broke in, and the mutilation happened after he was dead. I knew she couldn't be right. This killer craved horrific suffering, scooped out eyes, for fuck's sake. The rest of the interview yielded no new details. Suspicion turned to the other woman. Maybe she didn't know he was married, found out, sent someone, or did it herself. It's all conjecture. But frankly, I'm starting to wonder if this killer was even human. Continued with Mrs. Hagen. Self H. Hagen. Skipped intros, focused on infidelity. S. Ma'am, odd question, but any possibility of an affair in your marriage? H. No way. My husband was religious. Refused sex until marriage. No way he slept with anyone else. S. Not to be harsh, but people keep secrets. Maybe he wasn't fully honest? H. Really don't think so. Not like him. S. Just entertain the idea. Anything signaling someone else? Staying out late? Guarding his phone? Vague about his day? Anything? H. Number. When not home or working, sometimes went to the bar with guys, watched the game, liked basketball, very honest, trustworthy, never doubted him. Home exactly when he said. Never smelled of perfume, wasn't freshly showered, never cared if I used his phone, even lent it to me once. Wasn't having an affair, I'm sure. Discouraging. She seemed utterly convinced of his loyalty. Driving home, I stopped at Justin's pub, the bar she mentioned. Showed photos of the victim to every server, including the bartender of 25 years. Asked if they'd seen him with another woman besides his wife. Showed her photo too. Uniform answer, no, he never came in here. Maybe seen him at the grocery store or church, but never here. Never served that man. Boom. Caught the victim in a lie, 24 hours in. His wife likely never checked because she trusted him implicitly. A sports bar is an innocent cover. Twisted. How much trust enables deceit. Trevor took full advantage. He was definitely sleeping around. Why else lie? 2 down, 1 to go. Mrs. Trumbull mentioned her husband withdrawing, ditching friends, wanting to move. Escaping someone? An affair gone wrong? Threats? Confidence in my affair theory grew. Ready for the last interview. This one included Michael, the son, young at the time, but witnessed the aftermath. That messes anyone up. He's 18 now. Standard intro, consent confirmed. M. Michael, S. Elf, T. Mrs. Tremble. S. Mrs. Trimble, first questions for you. About the day, the time leading up, then Michael. M and T. Okay. S. Your statement mentioned relocating. Where and why? T. Arizona. Warmer weather, family there, easier. S. Did it ever feel like your husband was trying to escape something? Rushing? T. Not that I could tell. We discussed it, looked for homes within a week, but we'd considered it for about a year. Didn't feel sudden. S. What about him not talking to close friends? T. He'd hang out with them 3+ times a week. I stayed home, helped Mikey with homework, never minded him being out. They never came over, figured he wanted time away. Thinking back, it seems odd. Suddenly, over a week or so, never spoke of them, ignored calls, changed his number, like he was pissed at them. S. Did you ever meet these friends? T. Met all his buddies. Most had kids at Mikey's school. Some asked how he was when I was shopping. S. And you're sure the other 2 victims weren't in his friend group? T. Sure. Mentioned their names maybe. Nothing memorable. Knew of each other. Small town. You know how it is. Hardly knew them myself. My assessment. Wife never met the real close friends because he wasn't with friends. Another affair. Seems a stretch. All 3 cheating, but it's the only link I see. They didn't even hang out together. Turned attention to Michael. Awkward, silent, staring off. Doubt he heard much. Don't blame him. Seeing your father carved like a turkey never recovers. S. Michael or Mikey. Which do you prefer? M. Don't care. Either. S. Understand you were young. Recalling details will be hard, painful. Just a few questions, okay? M. Yeah, fine. S. Before your mother checked the room, did you hear anything? Footsteps, movement from your father's direction? M. Nothing I remember. Helping move boxes, heard cardboard on plywood, mom humming. Rest of house quiet. Think dishwasher was running. S. Time between your father leaving for blankets and you checking on him? M. Maybe 20 minutes? 25? Honestly, don't think it even took that long for this thing to kill my dad. S. Why say thing? M. Because whatever killed my dad wasn't human. Not normal. Nothing could have carved that shit into him so fast. My dad was strong, couldn't name one guy who could overpower him. Whatever this was, I don't know. No sign of struggle, that's all I'm saying. That stuck with me. His belief something inhuman did this? Chills. What kind of demonic fuck does this, and why? What could these men have done to warrant that kind of death from something not human? Stomach churning. I questioned if I truly wanted the answer. One more thing. The security tape from the Tremble house got permission. Hopes weren't high. Police reviewed it before, found nothing. Worth a try. Start was boring. Laundry, cleaning, television, eating. Didn't fast forward. When the husband went to the bedroom, I leaned in. Odd. He shut the door behind him. Just grabbing something, hiding something from the camera. Under the door crack, his shadow moved. At the 10-minute mark, another, smaller shadow passed the door. Police note. Family cat. Ignorant. Cat wasn't in the room when the body was found, and cats don't typically walk on 2 legs. Not foul play by police, just laziness. Assumed tape was useless since door was closed. Disagree. Victim was left of door, shadow came from right, happened at 10 minutes. Means overpower, murder, carve, took 20 minutes, not 30. Michael might be right. This thing can't be human. Oh, one more detail. After police cleared the room, moved the body, I spotted something fall off the victim on tape. Grainy, but looked like a small strand of rope. No rope burns noted. Thoughts? Next steps. Evidence room revisit. Autopsy report deep dive. Emailed original medical examiner for interview. Waiting reply. Any questions for him? Let me know. Going through Dad's old files. And having a chat with the old sheriff. No reason lead detective was kept off a triple homicide, especially keeping him on a suicide case. Smells like bullshit, wanting glory. Looks like it bit him in the ass. Part 3. The official reports. Autopsy and toxicology reports are in. Quick update with the findings. Report of investigation by county medical examiner. Decedent, Trevor redacted. Hagen, Caucasian, male, 38. Home address, redacted. Type of death, violent, suspicious, unusual or unnatural, found dead. Comment, found dead by wife. Amount of blood prevented immediate cause determination. Body description, partially clothed. Eyes, removed. Facial hair, number weight, 203 pounds. Height, 5'10". Marks and wounds, body mutilated. Arms, legs, torso covered in strange markings. Analysis suggests markings cut from inside the victim based on skin displacement direction. Markings unlike any previously seen. Photos documented for origin, meaning analysis. 3 distinct markings noted, possibly words, phrases, repeated across body. Eardrum shattered, presumed victim unable to hear during TOD. Skull intact, except snapped jaw. No brain damage. Eyes removed, found lodged in throat. Lungs clear, suffocation, not COD. Internal organs, bones intact, except healed wrist fracture, age 12, per medical history. Pooling analysis, blood flow indicates wounds inflicted, pre-mortem. Probable cause of death, significant blood loss. Manner of death, homicide. Confirmed my worst fear, happened while he was alive. New info, busted eardrums, missed in police report. No broken bones, organ damage. Getting in over my head with this case. Other 2 autopsy reports, extremely similar. Different vitals, identical wounds, busted eardrums, no brain, bone damage. Other victims, decedent, Derek, redacted. Tremble, Caucasian, male, 36. Height, 6'2". Weight, 279 pounds. Decedent, Howard redacted Mason, Caucasian male, 42. Height, 5'8". Weight, 191 pounds. One standout detail. Busted eardrums, eyes ripped out, throats clogged with eyeballs. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. ME noted 3 distinct markings, phrases scattered over the bodies. Could they correspond? Next, toxicology. Faxed reports to my house. Stopped by evidence room again. Still sparse. Clothing, old blood samples, victim hair, fingerprint analysis, no other prints found, police statement copies. Searched for over an hour for that fiber from the tape. Nothing. Incompetence seems likely. Left empty-handed. Called dad again, per comments. He remembered the murders, was working a middle schooler suicide case then. Parents begged him not to abandon it, so he stayed on that. Told Dept to call if needed. They assured him they had it handled. Sheriff decided against detective involvement, sent it to forensics. By the time Dept admitted needing help, trails were cold, case deemed unsolvable. Dad offered his old case boxes for me to review, though likely nothing relevant. Official toxicology reports. Identical for all victims. Drug screen result. No drugs found, except minor acetaminophen trace in Mr. Mason, from earlier headache reliever. Cannabinoid screen. Negative. Blood alcohol. Negative. Specimen received. The 8th of May 2006. Type 4. Blood vials. Test performed. The 8th of May 2006. Submitted by coroner. No sedative strong enough to incapacitate victims without detection. Officially, no drugs involved. More confused than ever. Nothing adds up. Only generates more questions. Exhausting. Good news, me replied, willing to meet. Also perplexed, wants to help. Questions for him? Comment below. Next update. Me interview, hopefully progress on deciphering markings, review dad's files, confront old sheriff about keeping lead detective off the case. Fucking stupid move, likely for personal glory. Backfired spectacularly. Story. The corpse singer's refrain. I first encountered Jerry DuPont in 1986. I was a fresh-faced beat cop, new to the force. He was a mortician, or rather, an assistant to one. We shared little common ground beyond a love for stories and our respective proximities to death. Despite this, a friendship blossomed, and we often found ourselves at the Rose and Crown after work, sharing a drink and regaling one another with tales, largely embellished. DuPont carried the quiet confidence of someone from a comfortable upbringing. His style was impeccable. He always favored dressing up for an occasion, never down. No matter how rigid his posture, Jerry always looked more at ease in a suit jacket and tie than I ever felt in a t-shirt and jeans. One of the first stories Jerry shared with me at the Rose and Crown was the narrative of his life. I was captivated by his family history. Parents lost young, leaving him with a trust fund and a gold ring with a black onyx face worn on his left pinky, the perfect, poignant detail to punctuate the tragedy of his youth. It wasn't until his teenage years, as he recounted them, that the narrative threads he'd laid before me began to intertwine and fray. I started to see the nature of his game, the unspoken rules he'd established between us. Suddenly, I was less certain about the precise circumstances of his parents' deaths and the true origin of the ring. Yet, this light deceit wasn't off-putting. Instead, I found it liberating. Jerry and I could express ourselves with far more candor when the truth was loosely tethered to hyperbole. His willingness to sit and share his mind was a balm to the machismo of my daily grind. I felt this burgeoning friendship was worth more than the overtime I sacrificed for our semi-frequent meetings at the Rose and Crown. And so, our gatherings became more regular. We spent those evenings talking, laughing, and drinking well past my usual bedtime. Unlike me, Jerry was a creature of the night, often welcoming the chance to extend our time together long after the pub closed. Sometimes we'd continue our discussions, or spin out a tall tale further. Often, we'd simply revel in each other's company. I soon began to notice Jerry's analytical, almost cold, and calculated mind. Sometimes, I would describe a case I'd heard about or was working on, presenting it to him as if he were the detective in waiting, not myself. Exercising that part of his brain thrilled him. The pleasure was palpable on his face. More often than not, he could dissect the puzzle, finding the solution with an ease that was almost elegant in its nonchalance. During one of our late-night walks, after the pub had shuttered, I asked him how he managed such eerie accuracy in his deductions. He stated plainly, "You look for the why above all. You always have. How could you not? You arrive at a crime scene, confronted with all its angles and aspects. You see the corpse as a human, someone who lived in that home, comfortably, only hours before." I listened, silent. We continued our walk, DuPont leaving my question unanswered, letting me ponder his subtle criticism. He stopped suddenly beside a large maple tree, our feet buried beneath fallen leaves, and continued. I arrive at work and don my vulcanized rubber apron. I put on my gloves. I arrange my tools, saws, scalpels. I turn on my tape recorder and begin to dissect. I see the plain truth of a person laid out before me. I open the window of their soul with a sternal saw, and I peer inside. I can see all there is to someone from above them. They can't lie to me, just as they can't lie to God. I was speechless as he seemed to contemplate the truth of his own words, as if he'd never posed the question to himself that I had. DuPont shrugged, sighed, and then quietly stated, "The corpses sing to me." The words would have been poetic had they not sent a chill to my very bones. He looked away, down the dimly lit street, peering into the darkness. His eyes seemed empty, lost in some near-forgotten memory. For the first time, I saw the duality of DuPont. A person who could coldly piece things together, and another who, just as coldly, took them apart. I grabbed his shoulder, shaking him from his reverie, and we resumed walking. It took a moment for him to follow, and the rest of the night drifted from one topic to another, astronomy yielding to galaxies, to the texture of the universe, wherein we found morality defined by evolving philosophy, until weariness claimed me. I bid DuPont good night and caught a taxi home. By 1991, I had become a detective. No help from DuPont, I might add, though I surely could have achieved it sooner, had I relied on him more. I wanted the rank on my own merits. DuPont had taught me much about the impartiality of deduction, and I was grateful, though sometimes I envied the inhuman ease with which his mind navigated murder. I wonder now if I became a detective because of Jerry DuPont, or in spite of him. One morning, in the early October dew, DuPont approached me, a newspaper rolled tightly under his arm. He had an uncharacteristic skip in his step as he met me for coffee. As he sat, without preamble, he spread the newspaper between us and jabbed a finger at the headline. It read, "Vancouver, British Columbia, seek the 8th of October, 1992. A cloud of fear and uncertainty has descended upon Rue du Chagrin, a rundown social housing apartment building, as a shocking and unsolved murder case continues to baffle residents and local law enforcement. The incident, which occurred last week, has left investigators grasping for clues in the aftermath of a brutal, possibly premeditated crime. The victim, Anna Stillwater, a 53-year-old divorcee, was discovered in her 13th floor unit by a concerned neighbor who, having not seen her for several days, noticed a foul odor emanating from the apartment. The gruesome scene was one of chaos. The apartment ransacked, broken glass littering the floor, chairs overturned. Miss Stillwater lay in a pool of her own blood, her throat slashed. More alarmingly, the assailant had made off with valuable jewelry, suggesting a robbery turned deadly. What further confounds police is the lack of any discernible entry point. The apartment's door was found locked from the inside, and investigators have yet to identify signs of forced entry, raising the possibility that the attacker was already inside when Miss Stillwater arrived home. Despite the apparent lack of forensic evidence, the local police force remains resolute. Detective Sarah Reynolds, heading the investigation, stated, "We are exploring every avenue and are committed to bringing the perpetrator to justice. This case presents unique challenges, but we will leave no stone unturned." Intriguingly, the victim's landlord, John Miller, expressed sympathy but also hinted at a possible motive, stating Miss Stillwater was consistently late with rent and often sought loans, leading to speculation that financial troubles played a role. Authorities are taking Miller's statement seriously. Detectives are delving into Miss Stillwater's financial history for debts or conflicts that may have contributed to her demise. The community remains on edge. Local residents express shock and concern, many calling for increased security. For now, the shadow of this unsolved murder hangs over the neighborhood. When I finished reading the account I already knew too well, DuPont said nothing. A new tension hung between us. As I looked at him, he stared back with that faraway, calculating, inhuman gaze, his mind whirring visibly, his eyes peering through me to some distant place. Finally, he asked what I thought, somehow knowing I was assigned to the case. I told him I agreed with my superior, Detective Reynolds, that it was a complicated and unique case, unable to say much more. "You're wrong," he said flatly, his eyes snapping into focus. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't more than a little insulted by his tactless assertion. I leaned back, coffee steam swirling between us, arms crossed, trying to suppress the defensive prickle of my ego. To his credit, DuPont let me stew, giving me ample opportunity to assert myself. I didn't. As much pride as I took in my job, I knew he possessed uncanny abilities I simply wasn't born with. I gave him a terse nod. He spoke. Miss Stillwater slashed her own throat. And no more. I was as perplexed as I was disappointed. I had come to know DuPont as a man with a mind like a razor, yet here he was, dashing all my illusions. "No," I said. The jewelry was missing. The apartment was ransacked. Not to mention the difficulty of sawing through her own throat with a serrated steak knife, I thought. His eyes lit up like a child's. I realized I'd taken the bait. Already on edge, I didn't appreciate the frivolity DuPont took in that moment. The hair on my neck rose. I sensed the same psychosis in him that I'd seen in so many murderers throughout my career. Resting his elbows on the table, fingers interlaced, he began to lay out his theory in more detail. Miss Stillwater frequently missed rent, frustrating for the landlord, Mr. Miller. So he gives her a final ultimatum: pay or get out. She has few belongings, save for jewelry from her ex-husband, her safety net. Fearing eviction, she pawns them to make rent, pays Miller, but is just short. So, The landlord changes the locks without her knowing. She returns home early, finds Miller outside her apartment. Unaware of the changed locks, she sees her door open, Miller leaving her unit. Assuming an eviction notice, she rushes in, closes the door, only then hearing the click of the second lock beneath the deadbolt. Miller, knowing she has adult children, tells her to call one to pay the remainder and leaves her locked in. DuPont paused for breath. "Why didn't she just call the police?" I asked. "That's unlawful imprisonment." He smiled, a smile I resented despite our friendship. It felt like gloating as he continued his wild assertions. She refrained, fearing removal from the apartment. Irrational, perhaps, but she feared homelessness. She also refused to call her children due to pride. It was her job to care for them. No, she stays, waging a silent war of attrition, knowing she has enough food to outlast Miller's cruelty. The only problem is the building itself. Derelict, slumlords. There's a CO2 leak. She becomes short of breath. Drowsiness overcomes her, heart rate increases. No matter how deeply she tries to breathe, she feels she's suffocating. She rushes to the door, locked. Dizzy, she crashes about, thrashing, tossing chairs, smashing pictures. Exhausting all options, she grabs a steak knife, attempts a tracheotomy, the only thing she can think of. She digs too deep, loses balance as the room swims, vision failing. She falls, elbow crashing down, knife tip beneath her skin. The force drives the serrated blade through ligaments, tendons, it skitters across the floor. It was impossible for him to know any of this with such certainty. Too many assertions. Yet, I was unsettled. Somehow, my friend was aware of case details we'd kept from the press, like the serrated knife. Could Jerry DuPont, the sharpest mind I'd ever met, be the killer? I'd known him so long, yet there was always that underlying lack of humanity. Was he toying with me, using our rapport to divert suspicion, framing her as a victim of circumstance? I countered, trying to shake the suspicion. Her fingerprints weren't on the knife. The tension eased from my shoulders as his version crumbled. Then, without pause, he said, "The cat licked it clean." But there was no cat. The building was pet-free. A burst of laughter rippled through me at the absurdity. DuPont's expression hardened. He clearly didn't appreciate my reaction, unaccustomed to my dismissal. I'd never once questioned his deductive mind. He slammed his hands on the table, startling me into silence, then quickly placed them in his lap, ashamed of his uncharacteristic outburst. Mr. Miller came to check on Miss Stillwater, unlocking the door, letting the scent of her bloated body into the hallway, alerting neighbors, and in the process, letting her cat, which she wasn't allowed to have, out of the apartment. I simply shook my head. It was too ridiculous. I offered an olive branch, suggesting he needed sleep, or was perhaps bored and daydreaming. He should pick up a hobby not centered around death, I suggested, again with a dismissive tone I now recall with shame. Check the pawn shops. Ask the neighbor. Check the keys and evidence. They won't match the door. Talk to her friends. See for yourself she had a cat, he said in a huff, standing so abruptly his chair scraped loudly. Stubborn, I refused to assuage his hurt feelings, remembering our old tall tales at the Rose and Crown. But as he walked away, I couldn't help myself. How can you be so certain such a ridiculous story is true? He turned, face flushed. Her corpse sang for me. We didn't speak after that. I visited his workplace once or twice, intending to apologize and smooth things over, but he refused to see me, instructing his secretary to turn me away on sight. It wasn't until a year later, with little movement in the case, that I considered bringing DuPont's version to Detective Reynolds. We were at our wits' end. The case was largely forgotten by the media, but we still worked it in our spare time. One morning, in a meeting, deep in nostalgia for my old friend, as I often was when the Stillwater case arose, I offhandedly mentioned DuPont's theory. While it had seemed far-fetched then, with the passage of time and close work on the case, no theory felt too outlandish. Detective Reynolds was furious. I hadn't brought this to her sooner. I explained how insane it had seemed. Quickly, as if every minute counted, as if the gruesome scene were still fresh, she ordered an exhumation for another autopsy. She dispatched beat cops to canvass the complex about a cat and headed to the evidence room to check the keys. As she walked away, Reynolds called back, ordering me to bring Jerry DuPont in for questioning. Cold sweat pricked my skin. I saw it in her changed demeanor. Reynolds could already see the headlines. Star Detective solves Stillwater death. But Star Detective catches mastermind murderer was far more attractive to the ambitious lead detective. I knew she meant to twist it for a grander, newsworthy narrative. What could I do? She was my superior. It was early evening. I parked behind the funeral home, where the adjoined morgue was connected by a covered walkway. I saw Jerry, buttoned up in a dress shirt and tie beneath his rubber apron, returning from the morgue. He squinted in the fading light, less than pleased to see me. As he started walking briskly away, I called after him, ordering him to stop, or I'd charge him with impeding an investigation. The words hurt him as much as they hurt me. I'm sick thinking back on it. It was a bluff, but all men fear authority. Despite his intellect, he was too shocked to see through my deceit. The drive to the station was quiet, uncomfortable. I tried to explain, to apologize, to say time had shown his claim wasn't so preposterous. He simply turned his head away. I was unsure if he even heard me. Detective Reynolds conducted the interrogation. At my desk, I wondered how she'd react if DuPont claimed the corpses sang to him. I didn't see him leave, but Reynolds walked past, rapping her knuckles on my desk. "Good job today," she said. For a moment, I felt pleased, until I concluded the compliment implied DuPont might have implicated himself without a lawyer present. The next day, I went to see DuPont, hoping to talk, to apologize, to set things right. Again, the receptionist turned me away. He'd called in sick. This did little to ease my mind. By then, Reynolds was likely seeking an arrest warrant. Regardless of DuPont's wishes, I knew I had to help my friend, to right the wrongs I'd unintentionally caused. Leaving the funeral home, I knew there wasn't a moment to waste. I drove around back, out of sight of the front foyer, and got out. I pulled lock-picking tools from my glove box and quietly ran to the morgue, bracing for the stench of death and chemicals. A flicker of criminal anxiety, new to me, surfaced. The tools caught, advanced tooth by tiny tooth, until the lock clicked open. The room was dark, save for a single light over a stainless steel table. DuPont wasn't there. It was my first time inside the morgue. Odd that though DuPont had taught me so much about myself, I knew so little of him beyond that brief family history. I examined the blood and bile-encrusted drain at the foot of the table. Curiosity overwhelmed me, though an invasion of privacy. I was there as a friend, not police. I excused myself. His tools, saws, pipes, scalpels, lay meticulously ordered on a table, gleaming. The cold tile floor seeped through my boots. My breath hung in the refrigerated air. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Small, faint, hardly louder than the fluorescent hum, like a human voice through the end of a balloon, whiny, drawn out, escaping air instead of words. Crawling terror wriggled up my spine. I was alone, but where had the noise originated? Again, the smallest whine, indiscernible words escaping like a vacuum. I looked under tables, in the trash, a morbid game of hide and seek. Finally, I came to the wall of tiny square refrigerator doors, 2 neat rows of 8. I placed my ear to each, one by one, praying I heard nothing. One by one, silence. Too afraid to open them, until I reached the final door, bottom right. Bile burned my throat as I heard the whine from inside. A little squeal of fear escaped me. I knew I had to open it, but fear held me captive. I'm a coward. I lacked the natural courage to face it. My mind couldn't even make sense of what I feared. I was shaking, and not from the cold. Only the brief, invasive thought that DuPont might be trapped inside gave me the strength to grip the handle and yank. It opened soundlessly. A gush of flesh-infused air assaulted me. I tasted the slow rot within, fighting back a gag. Bare feet faced me. I wanted to run, but then the whine again, escaping air. Without thinking, I grabbed the end of the tray and pulled. The body came into the light. I gasped. It was Jerry DuPont, My friend, stark naked, dead, both pale, rigged hands wrapped around a knife plunged into his heart, expertly slipped sideways between the ribs, left of his sternum. I fell to my knees, dumbfounded, tears welling. Hot regret for our last encounters seared me. I wanted to bash my own face until I was senseless. I hung my head and cried, emotions overwhelming me. I felt responsible, not truly understanding what I'd done by sharing his theory. Why hadn't I claimed it as my own absurd concoction? Then I heard it again, that small, long, drawn-out whine. From DuPont's dead body, gas, bloating his belly, escaping his lips. Is this what he'd meant? The corpses sing for him? Inconsolable, guilt-ridden, I bent down, hoping to hear my friend's soft voice one last time. I stayed frozen for an indeterminate time, until the gas broke free once more, passing his lips. Reynolds. I fell back, shocked, breathless. My mind must be playing tricks. But I could have sworn I heard a name. I sat a while longer, hoping for another sound, resolved it was a trick of the mind. His body lay quiet, deflated. DuPont was simply dead. I walked slowly to my car, radioed the station about DuPont's death. I didn't wait. I returned home in a daze. I called in sick the next day, unable to face reality, grief-stricken. But I turned on the television to see Reynolds' press conference on the Stillwater case. It played out as I'd suspected. Reynolds held nothing back. With DuPont dead, she was free to fit any claims to her narrative. He was the murderer, confessed to a friend on the force a year earlier, according to Reynolds. The case's absurdity made it unsolvable by rational minds. The culprit, Jerry DuPont, was as insane and twisted as he was brilliant. At least he got that. Knowing the cops were closing in, he'd taken his own life as dramatically as his murder of Miss Stillwater to escape justice. Disgusted, I was glad for the 2 weeks paid trauma leave. I couldn't have stomached the fresh lies. I'm ashamed I tolerated them at all. A coward. I feared losing my job, a job I'd worked hard for, but I let my friend's good name be tarnished. Upon returning to work, Reynolds called me into her office one last time before her promotion and transfer to a national RCMP position. I think she was congratulating me, or telling me to keep my mouth shut. I couldn't tell. My eyes were transfixed on a small gold ring with a black onyx face, sitting innocently among the stacks of papers on her desk. Detective Reynolds was as capable as she was ambitious. I needed no convincing to know what she had done. Story. I'm a retired major crimes detective, and I've seen true evil 3 times in my career. All 3 were in the last decade of my career. I spent 12 years walking the beat before I had the opportunity to step in and assist a detective and a CSI on a double homicide. Through my numerous connections from years on the streets, we managed to get several leads that led to the arrests of the guilty. I moved out of patrol and spent a decade investigating sex crimes, arsons, and armed robberies. I took advanced training seminars and workshops, studying past cases and offender modalities. I worked with the drug squads on serious assaults and the occasional murder before finding myself stepping in for a retiring detective. I was familiar with his partner, Connolly, and we became a good team. I bring this all up to emphasize that I've seen horrific shit in my 33 years on the force. Images I'll never shake, people who still haunt my dreams. I can honestly say that most of the criminals I've put away haven't been evil. They've all been motivated by something, however benign, to commit their acts. Then there are some that are on the fence, the ones that take violent crimes further than would typically be the case. And then there are those that dream up horrific atrocities to be inflicted on the world around them. Because why not? Patty Wilson fell somewhere beyond the shades of your typical serial killer. She was the first person I encountered on the job who I could reliably say had true evil in her. Patty was an RN that had moved into an OBGYN and birthing clinic in one of the city's lower-class neighborhoods. This particular clinic had a terrible miscarriage and stillbirth rate, but the numbers were fudged and kept hidden. Eventually, people in the neighborhood started talking, and word got out of how many deaths there were. Our station was contacted, and normally that type of thing would land on another desk, but we were short-staffed, so Connolly and I were brought in. Our investigation led us to Patty, and we found that in her 23 years at the clinic, there'd been over 2,000 miscarriages. She'd been giving a chemical cocktail to the expectant mothers, claiming it would help with sleep. Instead, it gradually killed the fetus as it grew. We'd also discovered that after several dozen healthy births, Patty would take the baby away to be cleaned up, but would return with the horrible news that the baby had died shortly after being delivered. Our investigations into that didn't lead anywhere concrete, but one of the threads we were pulling on led us to believe Patty had been lying to the mothers, telling them their baby had died, when in fact the baby was healthy but was shipped off to the highest bidder. A live baby on the black market could fetch a tidy sum, whether for organ harvesting, stem cells, or something more deviant and horrific. We believed it was racially motivated, as almost all the miscarriages and stillbirths occurred exclusively with black parents. But Patty denied it all. I remember watching Patty in our first interview with her. Her face was normal and moved expressively as she spoke and answered our questions, but her eyes didn't. They were empty, black holes, and the longer you stared into them, the more uncomfortable you became. Even after the trial, which had her served with multiple life sentences, Patty denied any wrongdoing. The next case where I witnessed true evil, it fractured into an investigation involving multiple events. Connolly and I were called in to investigate an attack on a beach volleyball tournament. On the city's largest beach, there was a national tournament with over 300 teams playing on 50 courts over the course of the weekend. The ages were from 12 to 65, and were both men and women. During morning warm-ups before the first game on the first day, one scream turned into 2 screams, turned into 100 screams. Over 1/3 of the players needed immediate medical attention. Their feet, ankles, knees, thighs, hips, stomachs, and in some cases up to their shoulders and face, were covered in deep, gushing cuts. Someone had gone to the beach the night before the tournament and brought hundreds of small, flat pieces of wood with razor blades sticking up from the centers in an upside-down capital T shape. The wood was dug into the sand, with the blade's sharp end pointed upward and hidden just under the surface so no one could see them. It must have taken hours to set up. There were no deaths, but the damage that was caused resulted in hundreds of injuries and several dozen athletic, young adults with sliced Achilles tendons and a dwindling future in sports. As with every investigation, we started off at the crime scene and worked our way outwards in tight, concentric circles. While the CSIs were combing the beach, Connolly and I were interviewing the people who ran the tournament, looking for any enemies or people who might want to target them, and this tournament in particular. But those led nowhere. Sadly, the CSIs fared no better. The entire crime scene was awash. There were so many footprints and shoe and sandal prints in the sand it was impossible to search for tracks. And the actual razor blades and pieces of wood had been doused in bleach before being placed in their small dugouts. There were no security cameras on the beach, and the lone one that was in the parking lot didn't capture any cars between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m. Our phones were ringing off the hook with tips, but there were no real leads. After a month, we were nowhere in the investigation. Then a new investigation came in, and our hamstrung department got even tighter. Connolly and I took it on as well. At a senior's home along the city's waterfront, a fire had started in the basement. Because of the accelerants used, it quickly overtook the first 2 floors. From there, the rest of the 8-story building went up. 22 residents and 9 staff died in the fire, all from smoke inhalation. We scoured the undamaged security footage, but again found no suspects around the parking lots or front entrances. The footage from the rear of the building was destroyed, so we couldn't check it. Then a third investigation dropped onto our desks. This time, there was a mass poisoning in a junior high school cafeteria. There were 23 deaths, 15 of which were students, and over 100 severe injuries. Our investigation showed that someone had stealthily broken into the school overnight and poisoned every piece of food in the cafeteria stockroom, fridge and freezer with arsenic. It was a miracle more people didn't die. All the school's exterior cameras were working, and after scouring them for clues, we finally found one at the back doors. The footage captured someone dressed in all black, with a hood and ski mask over his face. He'd used a small set of lock-picking tools to enter the back door which led to the kitchen. He used the same door to exit and ran off across the soccer field towards the water. And everything made sense. The beach volleyball courts, the seniors' home, and now this junior high, they all backed out onto the water. The school itself had taken advantage of that fact by introducing students to rowing, kayaking, sailing, swimming, and other sports and activities on the open sea. And the seniors' home was partially marketed based on its incredible view of the water. We hypothesized the 3 mass crimes were committed by the same individual. We marked all 3 locations on a map and scanned down the coast for all the marinas and harbors. Then we went back through all the routes and picked out various waterfront hotspots we knew would have footage of their exteriors. Using the dates of the 3 incidents, we cross-checked the footage to try to find any repeat boats on the nights in question. We watched a lot of footage. There was only one boat that stood out, a large, older black speedboat being driven by a lone individual we couldn't make out details of. A red light glowed from inside the cabin. Connolly and I got pictures of the boat printed and went back to check the marinas and harbors. None of the docks we went to had seen the particular boat or had records of it, which made us think it was docking at a private residence. I spoke to one of my friends in narcotics named Waco, and he brought up the drug boats that had been populating the cove near the last dock we visited. It turned out that the many drug users in our city had been moving away from alleyways and SROs and onto small dinghies and drug boats, turning them into floating pill houses. The boats were harder for cops to break up or investigate, and you could float in the cove or out in the nearby channel for up to 6 months before having to vacate. Of course, the 6-month rule was never enforced, so the cove kept getting busier with more and more drug boats. Waco offered to help. He went in one night and made his way around the 30 or so boats, which were loosely tied together. Waco found our black boat. He learned the owner was a guy people called Red. He was a dealer and let people use and pass out on board his boat afterwards. The next night, Waco went back, and we followed from a distance with the Coast Guard. We had Waco wired so we could hear everything on board. His plan was to get on with a few others to buy and use some heroin, then pass out. He would fake the shooting up part and pretend to fall asleep. Connolly and I listened in, hearing the details of the casual conversations going on from the other users as they bought and started prep. Soon enough, all the voices went quiet, including Waco's. Crescents. A rough, agitated voice called out, asking if anyone was awake. There was no response. The voice, belonging to Red, laughed and said, "Good." We heard some shuffling, then the engine on the boat rev into gear. The boat peeled out, leaving the cove behind. Waco had a GPS tracker in his shoe, so Connolly and I watched the boat on a monitor as it headed out to sea. We followed from a distance. The Coast Guard's lights all turned off and went completely stealth. Connolly and I continued listening in. After several minutes, the engine died down. There were sounds of chains rustling, then clanking together. Waco's voice came over the mic in a hushed and frantic whisper. "He's chaining us together. There's an anvil on one end." Our captain flipped the lights and sirens on, and the boat gunned it towards the blip on our radar. Over the mic, we heard Red notice the sirens. He started to panic and, from what Waco told us, was about to toss the anvil over the side. But Waco was up and ready to fight. He surprised Red from behind and got him in a chokehold. When we arrived, Red was unconscious on the floor of the boat, and Waco was sitting on his back. There were 5 users laying on the floor. They were all dead. Red had given them all spiked batches, and they died minutes before. When we got back to land, interrogating Red was useless and terrifying. Useless because he said nothing, and terrifying because of how he said nothing. He'd bitten off his tongue moments before we got him in the room. He was in a hospital for the next day and a half before we sat him down with a pencil and paper. We didn't really need Red to talk, though. There was more than enough evidence to put him away for the deaths of the 5 users on the boat. And then divers found more bodies along the same stretch Red boated on. Altogether, it appeared Red was responsible for the deaths of over 50 people. And that didn't include the beach volleyball tournament, the seniors' home, or the junior high school. The thing I remembered most about my brief time sitting across from Red during the interviews were his eyes. Just like Patty. I watched his face move and twitch and wrinkle, but his eyes were always the same empty black, holding my gaze. We never got a reason or motive for any of it. We found out he'd been in and out of foster homes up until his 16th birthday. Coincidentally enough, There was a house fire which killed both his foster parents and 2 other kids living there. After that, Red disappeared for a few years, then got nabbed for an assault in a movie theater and spent his 20s in and out of prison. Who knew how much destruction Red had caused over the course of his life? My third experience with true evil was just as Connolly was nearing his retirement. Poetically enough, it was our last case together. We'd been investigating the individual abductions of 6 Caucasian women between 18 and 22. It was a little old for grooming gangs, and we ruled out human trafficking. We'd done a ton of legwork and repeat interviews with friends and family. No one went back on previous statements. Everyone was solid. We didn't have a single person of interest. We did have one connection between the girls. They all traveled in similar underground heavy metal and punk rock circles. They also appeared to have a similar fascination with Satanism. Connolly and I went back over the details of each disappearance and found they all coincided with a certain opening band that occasionally played at a weekly death metal show. They were called Helvete and were a Norwegian black metal band. They were known for covering themselves in what looked like blood and performing in masks. Each mask was different, but followed the typical design of a face with eyes, nose, and mouth. But the texture looked like dried skin. Dark wicker twigs stuck out at the back of the head, resembling a porcupine. The more we read of them, the more they became our suspects. Connolly and I got an address and decided to go introduce ourselves. The place was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a large plot of land and forest. We parked up the driveway, and I'll admit, the walk up to the house, I was feeling nervous. It was dusk, and the sky was a darkening gradient of orange to dark blue. The residence itself was a large, old farmhouse. Death metal blared from somewhere inside, thudding out through the shuttered windows. There was a large, black van parked out back, and 2 sedans in the front. A scream erupted from the house, louder than the death metal rock. I pulled my 9mm, and Connolly pulled his .38. We called for backup, and went in through the front door, which was unlocked. The interior had a staircase to the right that led upstairs, and a hallway to the left that led to a living room, dining room, and kitchen. More screams erupted, along with the pounding music. We could tell the screams were coming from below us, and found a door leading to a staircase to the basement. The screams and music got louder, and were joined by chanting. Connolly led, trigger-fingered, creeping his way down the stairs. As he got to the bottom, Connolly swung out to clear the room, but someone was there. A tall mountain of a man in a dark mechanic suit, wearing one of the group's eerie masks, swung down at Connolly. Connolly saw it coming, firing his .38 into the guy. My right ear blew out, and my left was filled with ringing, chanting and screaming. As I got my head back on, I saw that the man had swung down at Connolly with a hatchet, and it lodged in Connolly's neck. He fell back, but continued firing into the far end of the basement. I let my 9mm lead me around the corner. There were old bed sheets hanging from the ceiling, obscuring my vision of the basement. The heavy metal kept pumping, and the chanting grew, but the screaming had stopped. I wanted to check Connolly, but I needed to clear the room. I stepped over the body Connolly had shot and followed the chanting. It led me through the sheets and into a large opening. Dozens of red candles were lit. There was a circle drawn on the floor, and inside it was an inverted pentagram painted in what looked like blood. In the far corner, the ground was dirt, and I could see several graves protruding from the earth. At the center of the pentagram, a young woman wearing barely rags was chained to pegs in the ground and had just given birth. On each point of the pentagram around her were what appeared to be the remains of 5 recently delivered and now dead babies. Kneeling in front of the exhausted and crying woman was another band member, dressed similar to the previous Hulk, but smaller and with a slightly different mask. He held the newest, just delivered baby in his hands as it cried. There were 2 other figures in the room, one over each of the kneeling guy's shoulders. The one to the right was holding a large traditional 2-handed sledgehammer. The handle was thick wood and the mallet was solid iron, lined with carvings and covered in blood and innards. The guy on the left was holding an open book and had been guiding the others in the chanting. We all stared at each other in some strange, horrific standoff. The guy with the sledgehammer pulled first, lifting it to swing at me. I leveled up on him and walked 2 rounds into his chest before turning to the other 2. The guy with the book threw it at me and lunged. I managed to get 2 more rounds off into him, but his momentum carried him through me and we hit the floor heavily. My head cracked the ground hard, and I saw the familiar stars rushing the edges of my vision. Everything sounded like it was underwater, but was moving really fast. I managed to turn my head and saw the one remaining band member, the one holding the baby. He'd placed it on the ground at the center of the pentagram. He grabbed the sledgehammer from his dead friend and lifted it to slam down on the remaining baby. I didn't even realize it, but I still had my 9mm in my hand. Reflexively, I pulled the trigger repeatedly until it clicked empty. The final shot connected with the guy's head as he was about to swing down. He toppled back, and the sledgehammer fell safely to the side. I don't remember much else after that. I woke up in the hospital and was informed Connolly had died, as had all the band members. The baby and the young woman had survived though, so there was that. The investigation was taken over by 2 other detectives, and revealed that the band had been taking women from shows, bringing them back to the farmhouse, and trying to impregnate them. Once they had gotten 6 pregnant, they planned a mass ritual sacrifice to be conducted after the final birth, as an offering to the devil in some Faustian bargain. The other women had been killed after their deliveries, and were buried in the far end of the basement. I never saw any of the band members' eyes when they were alive because of the masks, though I'm sure if I did, they'd carry the same darkness as Patty's and Red's. I said I'd seen true evil 3 times in my career, and that's true. But that last time, there was more to what happened than what I put in my reports. It's the reason I retired immediately after the case. It's the thing that made me realize there was an evil I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I'd seen it right when I got into the basement and leveled off my 9mm at the 3 men. There was something else down there with us. It was floating in the middle of the circle, kind of like black smoke, but it stayed in place, wafting together before separating and reconnecting. Bolts of red electricity shot through it. The smoke got larger as the chanting grew. It pulsed and expanded and reached out, forming into the shape of a body. What gives me nightmares now is thinking about if that last baby had been killed and the smoke finished solidifying. I'm terrified that whatever it would have manifested into would have shown me another realm of evil.